It's ad break time. I am proud to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. This summer and going into the fall, CLGS has some seriously exciting projects in the works. On July 8th, they're going to launch a campaign featuring two games, Witch Hunt 1649 by Martha McGill and Making History by Nicholas Proctor. Both of these games are exciting in the classroom and beyond, and actually both have been discussed by the designers on this podcast. So keep an eye out on July 8th, and let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davis with Beyond Solitaire, and this week on the pod, I'm super happy to have special guest Ananda Gupta on. You may know him as an amazing board game designer, but in his day job, he is design director at Riot Games. How you doing today, Ananda?
I'm great. How are you doing, Liz?
I'm super happy to have you on. Like, I've been thinking about it for a while. I'm really glad it has worked out.
I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, so you have a lot of upcoming board game news, so I figure I'll let you flag things like the upcoming Twilight Struggle special edition and stuff before I make you talk about video games the rest of the hour.
Sure. Yeah. So the Twilight Struggle Hall of Fame edition, 20th anniversary. I kind of forget the word order. Is it the Twilight Struggle 20th anniversary Hall of Fame edition? Is it the Twilight Struggle Hall of Fame 20th anniversary edition? I'm not sure. That's up to Jason Carr and GMT. But yeah, Twilight Struggle's. This is Twilight Struggle's 20th birthday. And we were able to add Hall of Fame thanks to Board Game Geek putting it into their inaugural Hall of Fame, and to Gamma putting it into their Hall of Fame last year at Origins. And so it's really great to be able to put out a new edition of Twilight Struggle that has everything we've done for it in the box, and that has all the it can be a sort of co-definitive edition with the collectors, from many years ago, we're really taking into account, we're really incorporating a bunch of things, developments in sort of board game visuals, right? Like the cards will take into account things we've learned from having played a lot more card games over the last 20 years, right? And so there'll be some layout improvements, and the cards I think are more colorful and pop more, and just generally I think it's a visually exciting offering for players.
Does it feel good to go back and work on it? And I mean, I guess, how do you feel about it now that you are 20 years out and you've done so much since then?
Yeah. So game designers, at least most game designers I know, we have very strong love-hate relationships with our own games. And I know there are some game designers who are exceptions to this. I know, Mark Herman just plays the hell out of his own games. And I play my own games as well. I play a lot of Teamfight Tactics, for example, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But there is definitely a phenomenon where game designers, when they look at their own work, all they see is what's wrong, right? And that is definitely true of me with Twilight Struggle. Like even as we've moved forward, when I play Twilight Struggle, it's so much easier for me to see the warts than to take like pure joy in it. So that's just kind of the game designer's curse, at least for me. Imperial Struggle's the same way. When I play Imperial Struggle, it is just very hard for me to see anything but what's wrong. And God, why didn't I do this differently? Oh, I really wish I'd had time to fix this. Oh, I really wish we'd play tested this a little more and smooth this rough edge. That's all I see, and that's true in digital as well, right? Like, right now in Teamfight Tactics, the new set, Cyber City, came out a couple weeks ago, and it's having just an enormously successful player response. We're really happy. Players are really happy. Players having a great time with it. And when I play it, all I can see, well, that's not true. That's less true. But like, but when I play it, I see the soft spots. I see the places where I'm like, oh, couldn't we have done this a little better? Couldn't we have polished this a little more? That's what I see. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
There's always a patch. There's always a patch. So here's a question for board game, revisiting. So I work for Cole Worley on a daily basis. So, he likes to go back and just really change fundamentally things that he's done in the past. And I think it's cool. I also don't know what my own practice will be like when I can look back on games that I designed far out. Were you tempted to make major changes to Twilight Struggle? Was that off the table? Like, what
No,
was your parameter for this?
no. So one thing that both Jason and I feel pretty strongly about, and that I feel very personally strongly about, is not invalidating player knowledge, right? Players have done us just an enormous honor by investing their time and attention into our games, and to repay that time and attention and investment with changes that invalidate their progress along the mastery curve, that invalidate their understanding of the game, that is not something that we want to do. Player knowledge is a gift, right? Like it's if players, there's so many board games, right? There's so many games, and when players choose yours to go deep on and to make a strong investment in of their time and their attention, then I think one of the worst things you can do is make a change that says, "Oh, yeah, that time you invested, we're chipping at that," right? Now, I'm not against, obviously, like if a game needs to be changed in order to be better, then I think obviously we do that all the time in digital. But even there, we we really want to take into account what level of investment players have made. And when I think about how to improve a game that's already out, I'm always thinking in expansion terms, right? Not change, but expansion, adding to the game in a way that will welcome or invite more investment and allow players to sort of voluntarily evolve how they play, right? And evolve that learning. That's my take on looking backwards and
Absolutely.
making up for trying and cleaning up one's messes.
Fair enough. So this also, I always have another question. What can I say? But it also makes me wonder. So player knowledge is a gift and player investment is a gift. But then, if you don't want to change too much because you're honoring that, how do you decide what you can change that'll make it worth it to buy a whole new copy of Twilight Struggle?
I mean, so to me, the answer to that is design a new game, right? Like design a new game that where those lessons, where you as the designer shoulder the cost of learning those lessons and make a new offer to players, right? That's right. So for example, like I think the original, like in original Twilight Struggle, I think realignment rules are something that we didn't quite get, bake properly in the oven. And so the follow-up games, right, like South Asian Monsoon, I think treats realignment rules differently, right? And I think that's the right approach, right? I think it's it's better to give players something new that shows your growth as a designer rather than to beat it up, right? Now, I mean, this is not an absolute, right? Like there are games where there's been a second edition that there are games that have been second editions where the second edition is basically a new game. I'm thinking of John Company here, for example, right? And for that's a kind that's where I think a second edition can be basically serve the function of a new game in this way, right?
Yeah. Actually, my first memory of you is of Giant John Company.
Oh yeah, from
Yeah.
San Diego Historical
So
Conquest
Mask
Street.
and I were absolutely getting into it with each other, but you were also like really into it. And I remember looking over thinking, who's this person? I don't know this guy. And I was like, oh, okay. It's Ananda Gupta. Got it. Like, of course he's really into this game. A serious gamer. It was a blast. I had a really good time.
Yeah, I like John Company Second Edition. I still don't quite understand deregulation in that game, but and how like the individual companies work, but one day.
Yeah, maybe we'll find out next year.
Yeah.
So this also leads to a question. So okay, it's the 20th anniversary edition of Twilight Struggles. That I don't know the years of anything, so that would put us at 2005.
Yeah.
And your LinkedIn page says that you got your start as a designer. You know, I'm assuming you mean video game design on that page in 2003.
Yes.
So I guess my question is, were you making board games or video games first? Or is it sort of like a concurrent thing for you?
So Jason and I started designing Twilight Struggle in I think 1999, maybe 98 or 99. I'd have to go back and look at the timestamps on my ancient Word docs. So yeah, I was definitely I've been playing video games since I was 6 years old, right? But like that was how I learned to type, right? By playing old text adventures, Zork and so forth. But I got into board games when I was in high school, like late middle school, like this sort of eighth to ninth grade territory. And in terms of design, I mean, I was making scenarios for the video game The Ancient Art of War, in the 80s, right? And I was making Lode Runner levels in the 80s because those were very early games that had level making tools. You like save them off on these, your 5.25-inch discs. It was great. But I was working on like playtesting and so on and so forth in the paper space, quite, in the, starting 98, 99. And I didn't get into digital games as a job until 2003, right? So yeah, I would say that like my design work was definitely paper first.
Interesting. So I guess my question is, so was your first digital games job like an indie job, or were you working for a company, like a larger company?
I worked for a studio. So I met at the 19, I want to say 1999. No, it would have been later. At an Avalon Con, right? Or I guess at that time it would have been just barely become the World Board Gaming Championships in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because I was on the East Coast at the time. I met Ed Beach in person, and Ed worked at a company called Breakaway Games, and he asked me, "Hey, do you play a lot of Civ?" And I said yes, and he said, "Well, we might have a QA role for you." And so I stayed tuned, and I did in fact get that QA role. I was, in fact, in the interview, I talked about my Cold War game that was sort of work in progress. That helped me in the interview, I think. And then, so I started at Breakaway in 2003 as a QA tester on Civilization 3 Conquests, right? So that was an expansion pack for Civ 3. It was the second expansion after Play the World. And then while I was working at Breakaway is when Twilight Struggle came out.
I guess the reason I'm asking is I'm very interested in. So I know what it's like to co-design a board game with someone. It's sort of it's a very personal, like almost a quiet process with another person that you get to know really well. So like David and I know each other a lot better from having made a couple games together. And I feel the same way about my other co-designers. So like Ricky Royal or Paul Wright. But working in a studio, like what does that design process look like, especially as you start to take on more responsibilities? So like now you're a design director. So early on, maybe you had a smaller assignment, but like what does working on a team like that actually entail?
Yeah, so that's a very broad question.
Yeah.
And it has changed a lot through the years. So for example, early in my career, I did Breakaway's main work was on, at least when I was there, was on work for hire, right? So clients would have a pretty clear idea of what they wanted experientially, but they weren't video game experts, so they didn't understand things like player experience and interface and mechanics and systems and so forth. But they knew what they wanted, right? And so designing to those goals, designing to those targets, and working. Breakaway was not a big studio. The design staff was certainly less than 10. Um, Ben Knight was there, and I learned a ton from Ben Knight. And then there were a couple of other there are several other designers, and uh, and so I worked I worked on those projects. Those are very collaborative. Obviously, a key element of studio work is being able to work in a sort of cross discipline way, right? Like not just being able to work with artists and engineers to be able to define requirements, to define the player experience. Design culture varies from studio to studio, and I've worked at studios that are very engineering directed, right? So where engineering is very much the sort of senior discipline, if you will. And I've worked at studios where game design is the senior discipline, and you can imagine which one I prefer. And so working on like client work for hire is quite different than working on a boxed product where you are working for a while, working for a long time, trying to pull a game together, put it in a box, put it on shelves, and then see what the customer response is, right? The player response. And then like the work I do now, which is working on a live service game, right? So that game, it came out in, Teamfight Tactics came out in 2019, in June 2019, and it's been on ever since. And we ship a new set. So it's a Teamfight Tactics, for folks who don't know, is a free for all game. It's 8 players. You are drafting a team made up of League of Legends champions, and pitting that team against other the other teams, right? And you're trying to end up on top, right? It's last team standing, and so one of the things that makes Teamfight Tactics unique-ish is that we turn over all the content every 4 months, right? Every 4 months we ship a new set, and the entire set goes away, and a new set comes out, and it's a new puzzle to solve, and it's a new roster of champions to figure out who you're going to build from. Teamfight Tactics, because it's a live service game, we are always developing multiple sets at a time, right? When I talk to my designers about, or talk to people about what it's like to work on the Teamfight Tactics team, because people ask in interviews and so forth, we have a heartbeat, right? Like our team has a heartbeat. There's the daily play test, right? So every day play test, you kind of roll into the office at 10, right? Do your early meetings, 10:30 play test. That probably takes 45 minutes of gameplay, maybe another 15 for the briefing, right? For the set lead to tell you, hey, here's what we're looking for feedback on today. Here are the rough spots. Here are the things you should not play because we already know they're bad and we're going to fix them. So it's a waste of time to give feedback on them. Here are the things that I really want to know about and, how these are feeling. Like, one of our principal game designers gave a really great talk a couple weeks ago to the whole design team about feedback and what good feedback looks like. And it's a critical part of a designer's job, right? And so and it's not natural, right? Like you can't just assume that people know how to give feedback, so we have to teach them, right? And so feedback. So we expect people then to spend 30 minutes writing feedback. That takes you about up to lunch. So everybody off to lunch. Then after lunch, everyone, the design team gets to get, that individual set team is going to get together. The set lead and their deputy, their sort of second chair, which we define on the team. They triage the feedback and say, great, okay, here's what we want to have another rep on in tomorrow. Here's stuff that we want by the end of the week. Here's stuff that we're deferring for a little while until we figure out what to do, because we don't have a great direction to action this feedback, and we just do that over and over and over and over and over and over and over, right? And then eventually we get pencils down for design, and art jumps in and says, great, things aren't changing anymore because you've got your pencils down on design, so we're gonna make it look pretty. They do that. It goes to our public beta environment, and then players play it 1,000 times more than we possibly could. They find all sorts of things. This causes lots of angst. We fix what we can. We have localization deadlines to hit, right? And then after 2 weeks on the public beta environment, it goes live, right? That is a completely different design process than working on a box product. And it's a completely, and both of those processes are completely different from working with an outside client that's hired you to make a game about X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Oh my God, that sounds extremely stressful. So, we talk about honoring player knowledge, we have earlier in this conversation. So how does that apply in a situation where everything changes every quarter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is one of our Teamfight Tactics has this as a player pain point. One of our most common, in our player surveys, one of the things that players complain about the most is having to learn a new set every 3 times a year, right? And so this is a struggle that I think is particularly acute for live service games. Live service games must have novelty, right? That is what players want. Players of live service games, I think in general, players of games want novelty. I mean, we talk about in board games the cult of the new. That's everywhere, right? Players want novelty, but they also want the novelty. They want that novelty to be accessible, right? They want to be able to access it. And so in Teamfight Tactics, there's we throw a lot of curveballs when we reboot sets, or not reboot, but like when we turn over a set, right? Excuse me. But you can edit out the burping.
I shall.
But players value novelty that they can access using the base of accumulated knowledge, right? So the economic mechanics in TFT, the mechanics by which units star up, right, and become more powerful, the item system. These are all things that we will tweak and that we will build on, but we do not casually change, right? So that players who come into a new set, they are focused on the fun novelty of, oh, I want to see, like, who are the 5-cost champions in this set? The 5-cost is the highest tier, the most splashing, powerful units, right? Who are the 5-cost units in this set? I want to see who those are, right? Oh, wow, this one does something really interesting. But what we don't want is players to be completely adrift. We actually use a model internally called the orange box model. Basically, for the set, we identify orange boxes and gray boxes, right? So every champion, every spell, the set mechanic, these are all either an orange box or a gray box, right? And a gray box is where we are not spending innovation cycles, right? So if we have 1-cost Vayne, right? So Vayne is this sort of shadow hunter archer character. She uses like these 2 crossbows. She's got like this little pistol crossbow, and then she's got a big crossbow for a big attack. And she's very slippery, right? Like she's very somersaulty and dodgy and moves around, right? 1-cost Vayne, she's gonna stand and shoot her crossbow at you, or at the nearest opponent, and probably every 3 shots or every few shots something cool is gonna happen, like maybe some bonus damage or whatever. But 1-cost Vayne, we don't want players thinking a lot about how to learn 1-cost Vayne, right?
Yeah.
But 5-cost Vayne, if we decide to print Vayne as 5-cost, then yeah, that's where we want players thinking, ooh, what have they done with Vayne in this set? That's awesome, right? 5-cost Vayne. So yeah, typically our 1-costs are gray boxes, right? That doesn't mean they have to be. Like we can have an orange box 1-cost champion. We did in set 11, Inkborn Fables. that was delightful for players. But we're not going to have like 3 orange boxes in the one cost. And so that's how we kind of systematically approach it, right? We think about where we are spending our innovation cycles and where we want players to kind of go, ooh, what's that, right? As opposed to, we want our veteran players, again, in the service of honoring their player knowledge, we want our veteran players to say, oh yeah, okay, I see they did marksman again as a trade. Cool. Let's see who's in it. I see, we've got these 1 cost, these 2 costs. I understand how this works, right? I don't have to really like scrutinize it too much. And so those are all different ways we have of walking that tightrope between novelty and respecting player knowledge.
How many cycles ahead are you typically thinking at any given time? If you've always got to be coming up with something new, it can't be last minute. 3.
Yeah, we're trying to be 3 sets ahead. Trying to be 3 sets ahead, which is challenging because we learn a lot from each set we ship, and so incorporating the lessons of set X into set X plus 3, that's not too hard. But incorporating the lessons of set X into set X plus 1 is harder.
Interesting. So, I mean, I don't know fully what a design director means, so I could just be wrong. But when I was a teacher, I thought I never wanted to be an administrator because I like to be really like down in it, like with the kids, kind of hands-on. How hands-on is your current job? And then in terms of the directing part, like how do you like direct a whole team of people to like how that delegation? How does that feel for you as somebody who has your hands on your personal board game projects for sure?
Well, that's a good question. So the most important part of the answer to that question is that I have a lot of help. Right, I have great leads. There's another design director on the team. We have a big design team, so we have 2 directors, and he is that's Stephen Mortimer, aka Mort. He's the gameplay director, and so he and I share the responsibility of leading the team. He is a deep expert on the gameplay of TFT. I'm a very good TFT player, right? But Mort is Mort could play TFT professionally if he wanted to. Right, and TFT does have a small pro scene, so that's been fun to see that develop. We have the TFT Open every year, and those the prizes are getting nice. So yeah, the key to that is that the key part of that answer is I have a ton of help. I have great leads I can lean on. Mort is a great gameplay director, and his attention to detail in the gameplay is just phenomenal. I have noticed in my career that design leaders, they get very sad if they are not designing things. And so I have made it a requirement in the organization that any design manager must also have a portfolio of individual contribution. So, for example, I worked a lot on our AI last year. Right now, I'm working on some additional features as a designer that I can't really discuss, but they'll be awesome. And that requirement trickles down the org, right? So all managers, I think designers who are pure managers become sad and decide to leave. And I kind of noticed this. You mentioned your experience as a teacher. In my high school, I was always, I guess at the time, it didn't strike me as unusual that almost all of the administrators also taught classes. Looking back on it now in this conversation, I'm wondering if that's because they got sad when they weren't teaching. But yeah, like even the head of school, obviously there were some peer administrators, right? But like the head of school, the deputy head of school, the a whole bunch of people whose job titles would not have led me to expect them to be teaching classes, taught classes. And I suspect it's similar reasoning.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that, one, you're moving up the chain, but it's hopefully with experience and knowledge of a job that you have loved. But then also you're like, even now for me, like my classroom experience is going to get less and less sharp and relevant the more time I spend outside the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you understand somebody's problems if you don't do their job?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, our design leaders on Teamfight Tactics are more hands-on than maybe some other organizations. And I think there's a lot I could say about like the ways in which we run the design team that make that make delegation with confidence easier. One of the some of it does get back to I think an aggressive approach to learning. I think there are a number of teams, some successful, some less, in the video game industry, where people really, where Riot has a commitment to hiring earlier in career talent, right? Like we try to hire people. We try to hire juniors rather than relying entirely on senior talent and recruiting senior talent. And there's a lot of benefits to hiring juniors, but it does come with a commitment to teaching them. And I'm reminded of when I was on the East Coast, I was a Maryland fan because I did part of a degree at the University of Maryland, and I became a fan of their basketball team. They actually had a national championship run while I was there, and Gary Williams, who was the head coach of the Maryland Terrapins at the time, he said something really interesting in an interview that stuck with me a long time, which is the question was about basically how coaching up people, coaching up players from freshman year through senior. And he said basketball is overcoached and undertaught. And I thought that was a really interesting comment. He was not a perfect coach, obviously, but that emphasis he had on teaching the game as opposed to coaching the game, where at least I understood him to be meaning like teaching the game means that you teach people solid fundamentals, you put them in so that they understand what their role is and what their options are in various court situations, and then they're gonna make good decisions. Whereas coaching them involves varying amounts of sort of berating and cheerleading, and kind of telling people what to do, right? And so I kind of felt as the TFT team grew to its current size. So we have I think 32 designers now. As the TFT team grew to its current size, I was increasingly feeling that we were overcoaching and underteaching, and that was leading to various types of pain and anguish. And so this gets back to, I asked one of our principal designers to give a talk to the whole design team on feedback, right? Something very basic, right? We expect, like, we list feedback in our job descriptions as like, one of the qualifications of this job is you must be able to give and receive feedback, right? And understand what that means. But of course, we're not just going to expect people to come in the door and know what we mean by good feedback. And so the answer was, we're going to teach them. Right? We're going to teach them what it is, and then they will do it, and they will be happier, and I will be happier, right? Yeah,
that is very fair. So it's very fun to talk to you about things like TFT, because I really because you and I have only crossed paths in kind of wargamey historical game contexts,
Yeah.
it makes me wonder, how did your, I guess, time in historical gaming that, is continuing, but like, encountering Ed Beach? Like, it sounds like did you know him as, a board game designer or a video game designer first? Like, how's that community, I guess, fostered you? And then also, how do your historical game design sensibilities impact your work that's decidedly not that?
Yeah, yeah. I would say in a few ways. So I met Ed as a board gamer, right? Like we met at a board game convention, but then um, obviously when he and Breakaway hired me, right, that was in the digital context. But then I was part of his Here I Stand playtest group. Um, Now I don't want to overstate this, right? Like I did not like there are other people who Ed leaned on much harder than he leaned on me for playtesting Here I Stand. But I flatter myself that I had an impact. In particular, I was the one who suggested the name Here I Stand to him. uh, and Yeah, I mean Ed is one of my most important mentors. I owe a lot to him. And he, working with him at Breakaway and on paperboard game projects, was just really was really educational for me. In terms of yeah, and so like I've had likewise, like one of the earliest games I play tested for GMT was Wilderness War, which is Volco, and playtesting that was a ton of fun, and I flatter myself that I gave Volco some good suggestions, some of which made it into the game. So I definitely owe a ton to other designers, both in digital and in paper. And I'm also grateful to Breakaway for giving me a lot of design responsibility when I was definitely not senior enough to have that responsibility. Like it was very much, it was a great learning experience when I moved from QA into design at Breakaway. In terms of your second question, unless you had did you have any follow-ups there?
No.
Yeah. In terms of the second question, so when I started at Riot, I worked on Legends of Runeterra, the digital card game, and I wore a lot of hats on that project because it was an R&D project. One of the hats I wore was the narrative lead. I was the narrative lead for about a year, maybe a little less than a year, because we didn't have one and we needed one and we needed to hire someone. And while we hired someone and ramped that person up, somebody needed to do that job. And I would say that my historical gaming made its greatest impact when I was doing that type of work. And the reason is that so obviously Riot's flagship game at the time and still is League of Legends, which is an arena game where you have an enormous cast of champions, and it's a 5-on-5 game. So it's a 5-on-5 team game in its basic in its most common configuration, right? Of course, now we also have Valorant, which is our tac shooter, and that's also a team tac shooter with a distinctive and really cool cast of characters. And so all those characters are really interesting. There's in League of Legends, there's a ton of narrative and audio design and so forth that went into making all those characters super cool. And so they all have really interesting. They have rich backstories and cool VO lines, and those all integrate with their abilities really well, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, they're still all in this arena, right? And so when we were making a card game, one of the things we were doing was putting those characters into their world, into Runeterra, not just on Summoner's Rift, which is the name of the arena, right? And so what do these characters look like? What do they do? What are and obviously this is a card game. We're not just going to have champions, right? There's going to be all sorts of other characters that relate to the champions, that relate to the world they live in, and so on and so forth. And so tackling that world building task was really, really interesting and really tapped into my historical gaming sensibilities, right? So in Runeterra, the world of League of Legends, one of the factions is Noxus, and Noxus is this sort of aggressive expansionist empire, and it valorizes war and it valorizes combat. And I remember being in a meeting and having a conversation about Noxus, and I said, "So how does Noxus not just collapse into, how does Noxus stay intact, right? How does yeah, and what is Noxus like?" And the answer I got was, "Well, it's kind of like Sparta, right?" And I said, "Okay, so a third of the population is slaves." And they said, no, we're not touching slavery, right? Like this is not a slave society. I'm like, okay, so who feeds the army, right? Who makes sure the axes are sharp, right? Who makes sure the armor is shiny, right? Like I see all these, these characters all have very sharp axes with very shiny armor. Like how does that work? And it was clear that like there was, the narrative vision that had gone into Noxus was kind of aspirational and reachy, but hadn't really been thought through to the bottom. Because, and again, I'm not this is not intended to be a like a sharp critique of the people who worked on that lore before Legends of Runeterra, the card game, because they didn't need to, right? What they needed was what their job was to make the individual Noxian champions as cool and compelling as possible, and to go as deep as possible on those champions. But the card game's job was to go broad, right? And so making that adjustment and building a broader understanding of Noxus that made sense, that was aspirational, but that was still true to the spirit of Noxus that had been established. Because again, we are not invalidating the investment of players who spent a lot of time reading lots of champion bios and understanding what Noxus is. We're not gonna reboot that for them, right? And I'm not saying we've never rebooted champion stories and so on and so forth, right? But we try not to do it. We really try not to do it, right? Because when you do that, again, like players who really got invested in that storyline or invested in that particular character vibe, now you're telling them, "Hey, sorry about that investment you made," right? And so that, yeah, I would say that is where like my historical gaming really came in and helped world build.
Yeah, that makes sense. I often say that good history, I don't say this anymore because I'm not students anymore, but that it's about like knowing what the right questions to ask are more than it is knowing the exact facts at any given moment.
Yeah, I mean, in world building and lore and games, you always have to resist the temptation to answer all the questions, right? Like what you want to leave interesting questions for players to discuss, debate, imagine about, like use their imaginations about. And if you do answer a question, what you want is for the answer to that question to invite 3 more questions, right? You
Indeed.
always, yeah.
So, okay, this actually leads me to another kind of set of questions about your twin worlds of design, the board game world and the video game world. One of my favorite little intermittent projects the past couple of years has been with Fred Servo, where he and I look at wargame archaeology, and we just read old, issues of the General. Apparently, he finally got a copy of Africa Core. We're going to attempt to play by mail.
Nice.
But I feel like, yes, we're in a golden age of board gaming. There have been tons of design innovations over the years, and I don't want to put that down. But at the same time, I feel like board games have a much longer life cycle than most video games. People are still playing their stuff from the 60s and 70s. Avalon Hill is for some people still kind of like a golden age of gaming, whereas I'm much happier with like the deep history stuff that happens now personally. And like I know that there are also retro gamers in video games, but how's it felt for you, I guess, to be part of board games with the changes that we've seen that don't seem as dramatic to me compared with video games where, my God, the change.
Yeah, the technology advancing. So that's a really interesting question because it's tempting to think of video games as the technology is constantly evolving and so on and so forth, and people are always playing the new video games. There's a lot of truth to that, but there's something underlying there. The majority of video game players, I think the 6 biggest games right now, all came out before 2020.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
I guess Skyrim still out
Well,
there.
but I mean, it is really interesting. Like right now, one of the most talked about trends in video games is why aren't players picking up new stuff, right? Why are they playing games that have been out for more than 5 years? Why is that? Why are they spending so much of their time there? Right, because Fortnite, more than 5 years. Us, more than 5 years. Even World of Warcraft, right, which obviously is not where it was at its peak, but still has, I think, double-digit million players, right? Right, I think they're still in the 10+ million player range. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am, especially if you take into account WoW Classic, which they decided to embrace. And so, yeah, players of video games are really sticking with things that have been out for a long time, and this is very worrisome for studios that are working on new games. And I think part of it has to do with the accumulated player knowledge that people have, right? Like people are just very comfortable in some of these long running live service games. That said, it's not like there aren't new and innovative titles coming out. The one I've been playing most recently is called Blueprints. That's all the rage.
That's a puzzle game, right?
Yes, it is. It is a sort of creepy puzzle mystery roguelike. And it's quite ingenious and obviously a labor of love. And I'm really enjoying it. And like there's also some gray area, right? Like obviously Civilization 7 came out pretty recently. I've spent quite a lot of time in that one. Is that a new game? Yes. Is it, but it is definitely standing on the shoulders of giants, of the giants that preceded it in the Civ series, right? And so yeah, I think that right, while video gamers are playing, there is as you said, there's a retro video game sort of subculture, sub hobby, particularly in the streaming community, right? And then there's the speedrunners, right? There's a bunch of other people who are who are playing older games for like different intrinsic reasons. But a lot of video game players are playing either titles or franchises that have been out for a long time. Obviously, the whole sports gaming sector as well, right? Like Madden is a perennial hit. People buy Madden every year, even if the changes are quite minimal, and just involve roster updates. EA was catching a little bit of flack about that. Like you're charging $60 for basically what looks like everybody's got the right jersey now. But that is that, and obviously that sentiment for a certain sector of player is valid. But I mean, Madden has innovated a lot. They've like if you look at the animation trees for Madden players right now, or like players in Madden right now, as opposed to 4 years ago, right? Like they are night and day, right? And that just leads to a smoother and more realistic experience, kind of on the margin. And maybe but you don't put that on the back of the box, right? You don't put 20% better or 12% better animation trees on the back of the box. Like that's not a that's not a selling point, right? I mean, but it's value, like it's value for players. But yeah, it's not a back of the box feature. And so I think yeah, the technology the technology element is definitely something that drives like video game early adopters. Um, but the trend in video games right now is people are playing things that they kind of already know.
I find that so interesting because I've always felt like learning a video game is less of a risk per se than learning a board game because the overhead for a board game is massive. Whereas for a video game, you can usually just kind of boot up and get a tutorial and just do stuff. So I'm actually sort of surprised by that.
That's a great segue to Mr. President.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you read my mind. So yeah, how are you kind of taking it? Like, I always think, man, I would love it if somebody would just teach me a board game. So you are actually digitizing Mr. President right now.
Yeah, and more specifically, the team at Exia Labs is doing the heavy lifting, because Gene already did the design heavy lifting, and so the Exia team is doing the engineering and visual heavy lifting. I am more of a I'm more of a vision holder for the project, and I help. I help make sure that we're staying aimed
Yeah.
at the right goals.
The conduit between worlds.
Yeah. The goal and those goals, which with Mr. President are really important, are to keep it as a board game port, right? So what we do not want is for Mr. President to seem like a video game, right? Like we want board game players to be able to look at it and instantly say, yes, this is the Mr. President board game. There have been very successful games like Dune Imperium. I think that's a standout. There have been some very successful video game digital board game ports. With Mr. President, one of the things, so there are obviously a bunch of things that need to be in digital, that the player handles entirely in their brain in paper, right? For example, losing the game, right? In Mr. President, there's, I think, God, I always get this number wrong, but I think there's like 16 ways to instantly lose the game. And so in paper, if one of those ways triggers, you're just like, oh, okay, I lose, time to box it up or start over or whatever. In digital, that's not enough, right? In digital, we have to tell you that you lost the game, and ideally, we tell you something interesting or show you something interesting. In our case, we're doing some visualizations of the world as it is if you lose in these ways. So for example, in Mr. President, if you hit 15, if China gets 15 influence, then that's an instant loss condition for the player. And so in the digital version, if that happens, our art director Josh Balcaceres has created this lovely and terrifying painting of, imagine like a news scene, and you got Taipei Tower flying the PRC flag, and there's helicopters, and there's a news ticker that says, PLA moves to secure Taiwan SAR, right? That's something we can do in digital that is not in paper, and it's some value we can add in digital. But we want to maintain the tactile feel, the physical feel of Mr. President, right? We want to create an experience that doesn't, that has exactly the right zoom level, right? Something that the player can adjust easily, seamlessly. We want, one of the things that one of the team's mantras is that the hardest part of game development is finding the fun. And this is something that we don't have to do, right? Gene and at GMT has already found the fun when he designed the game. And the game has great reviews, and the first edition sold out. So the fun has been found. What we need to do on the digital side is find the feel, right? That's our job. Right. And so the UX and the UX flow and the UI implementation, that's our mountain to climb. There's a lot. There's a lot going on in Mr. President. So
Indeed. I joked the first time, like, this game should have been an app or something, and like, now here it is.
Yeah. Fingers crossed, here will be. Yes.
Amazing. All right. So honestly, I feel like I could ask a million questions, but we're kind of starting to come up on an hour. So I'm going to ask you softy questions instead. So what I always ask people is, what have you been playing lately that brought you some joy? In your case, it could be a board or a video game, since you do a lot of both.
Well, I've been playing Blueprints, which I recommend to anyone who wants like a really unique, like it's a very unique game. Like it seems very niche to me, but it's been very popular. it's certainly been the rage at all the rage at the office. People should definitely try that. I have been playing a lot of Civ 7 lately, and so I'm actually going to go off on Civ 7 a little bit here.
Do it.
Right. So Civ 7 to me, it is. So right now it's controversial because, it's got mixed reviews on Steam right now, right? Which is, not good. Like that is not what you would want to see from a franchise title like that. So the player reaction to Civ 7 has been significantly more negative than Firaxis and the Civ team were hoping. And I'm not here to say that those players are wrong. I think that a number of the issues that the players have been raising in their reasoning for the mixed reviews, for negative reviews that they've given the game, are valid. They certainly were at launch. I think the team has done a lot in the 2 major updates to really push that better, to really address some of those issues. But the game design in Civ 7 is brilliant. Civ 7 is playing like a game that is taking seriously the issues with that genre, right? With the 4X genre. The age resets, the fact that they severed leaders from Civs, which seems a little ahistorical, like, oh, I'm going to play Charlemagne Rome, right? But what that does, though, is because the leaders are so expensive to produce, it means that they can publish more civs without needing to publish more leaders, right? So that gives them a content production pipeline that will just pay off huge dividends for players in terms of replayability, right? And combinatorics, right? Combinatorics are really important. I mean, teamfight tactics, they're at the heart of teamfight tactics. How many different ways are there to play? How many different teams? How many lines of play? If I can play Rome with 3 different leaders and have 3 different experiences, the replay value, the value for my money on a game like that, is very strong, right? Very strong. The city building system in Civ 7 feels like a really natural and logical progression of the unstacking cities that we saw in Civ 6. The great people system just makes so much more sense, and makes and just feels so much better. It feels like it has the right weight. The fact that every civ has its own unique civics mini tree, in addition to the shared civics tree and then the tech tree, really helps the civs feel different from one another. The fact that the ages have the different age progress tracks makes it feel so much more historically appropriate. Feels like what you're doing in each age is qualitatively different, which is the first time Civ has done that, and it makes so much sense. I think the Civ team has done just an outstanding job of pushing the design in the right directions and providing a fresh Civ experience that, again, really builds on some of the core pain points with that genre. And I'll sum up those pain points by saying previous civs all had in common that they get less interesting once you've seen the whole map, right? And so the most important part of a previous civ game was the early bit. I guess I could actually talk a little bit about that. So civ style games are at their most fun when you make a plan, and then because you see something new on the map, you pivot the plan. That's what causes you to keep taking turns. You're like, okay, great. I finally unlocked libraries. I discovered writing, so I unlocked libraries. So now I'm going to build libraries in my cities. That's my plan. Great. I'm done. This is my plan. I've got my rails moving forward, and then your scout finds a natural wonder. And you're like, oh man, I need to found a religion. Okay, well, you know what? Let me just pivot this over. Let me just get enough gold to maybe fast build a settler to kind of build a city over there. Okay, but now I've got my new rails. Great, my settler's on the way. The libraries and the other cities are going to finish building. I'm just going to plop that city down, and then I can shut it off and go to bed, right? and then your settler finds something else, and your scout finds something else. You're like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should like that's where like the constant drip of new information from the map is what is just a key element of the most fun part of those games. And once the map is fully discovered, that faucet turns off, and that's why so many players stop playing after they've revealed the map and and there are no city spots left. You're like, okay, well, I see where this is headed, right? What Civ 7 has done with the age resets and with the changing age progress tracks is there's never a point where what you're doing, which is going to pile up massive yields of science and culture, whatever, you're just not like you just never reach the point that you did in previous civs where it's like, okay, cool, I just need to maximize my yields of these and just coast to the end of the game. That's just not in Civ. That's just not Civ 7's vibe at all. So I have been spending a lot of time with Civ 7, and I really think highly of it. And I would urge players who have been scared off by the reviews or by the mixed reception to give it a shot.
All right, you got me curious now too. And then so for people to follow you or your work online, where do you like to be found, if at all?
I don't have a huge online presence, or not a loud one anyway. I participate in Board Game Geek discussions. Excuse me. I pay attention to LinkedIn, and I'm on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. But yeah, that's where I talk about things. But generally, like I love this was a great conversation, Liz, and I love talking on podcasts. But I have always tried to be heard most through the work. Right. I've tried to say what I have to say creatively.
Yeah.
Through the stuff I work on, rather than with words.
Fair enough. I respect that.
So I'm not a super, like, you won't find me doing like in-depth critiques or I'm just not like whenever I talk in depth about a game, it's generally when I think a game is underappreciated, right? Like like that diatribe I just gave you about Civ, right? Diatribe's the wrong word, but like, that disquisition I gave about Civ, right? Like when I think a game is underappreciated, where I think players are not seeing the full picture, that's where I like to talk. But I try not to rant. I find ranting unproductive.
Fair enough. I, on the other hand, am terminally online, and y'all can find me anywhere beyond Solitaire. Thanks again, Ananda. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad you came on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz. It was a great time. Take care.
All right, everybody. Please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.